the unseen architect of a billionaire's heart. Listen up, everyone. Get ready for a story about unexpected turns, raw honesty, and finding family in the most chaotic way possible. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, have you ever witnessed a stranger's act of kindness change everything? Part 1. A dash into traffic. "Watch out!" Martina yelled, lunging into the bustling traffic without a second thought. A little girl stood frozen, paralyzed amidst screeching brakes and blaring horns. Her huge eyes reflected absolute terror as she remained motionless in the middle of the avenue. Martina reached her just as a yellow taxi sped dangerously close, sweeping her into a tight hug and pulling her swiftly towards the curb. "Are you okay? Where's your mom?" Martina asked, breathless, holding the trembling child. The little girl didn't respond. She just stared at Martina with a mixture of fear and confusion. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old and seemed completely disoriented. "My name is Martina. What's yours?" She tried again, as people rushed past them, oblivious, as if nothing unusual had occurred. "Lucy," the child finally murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "Lucy, what a beautiful name. Do you know where your parents are?" The girl shook her head, her eyes starting to fill with tears. Martina glanced at her watch. It was 7 in the evening, and she had a report due tomorrow, but that now seemed utterly insignificant. She took Lucy's small hand and decided to lead her to the nearest police station. The officer on duty took their details with evident disinterest. "You can go. We'll take it from here," she said, gesturing towards a bench where Lucy was expected to wait. "I'd like to stay with her until someone from her family arrives," Martina replied firmly. Hours crawled by. Martina bought Lucy a sandwich and juice. Slowly, the little girl began to open up. "My dad must be looking for me," she said in a tiny voice. "He's always busy." Martina nodded understandingly, not pushing. She focused on distracting the child with invented stories about princesses who got lost and always found their way home. At 11 o'clock that night, the precinct door burst open. A tall man in an immaculate suit stormed in like a hurricane. His face showed a potent mix of intense worry and tightly contained anger. "Lucy!" he exclaimed, spotting the girl. "Daddy!" Lucy ran to him, and he embraced her briefly before meticulously examining her, as if searching for injuries. "Are you all right? Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice tightly controlled. Martina slowly stood up, observing the scene. It was then that she recognized the man. Thomas Grant, the owner of the massive corporation where she worked as a junior analyst, a known billionaire, famous for his cold efficiency and implacable demeanor. "Mr. Grant," the officer interjected, "this young lady found your daughter in the middle of traffic and brought her here." Thomas Grant's eyes landed on Martina for the first time. His gaze was piercing and calculating. "You work for me, don't you?" "Yes, in the finance department," Martina replied, feeling a strange discomfort at his formal tone after she'd just spent hours caring for his daughter. "I appreciate what you did for Lucy," he said, in a purely professional tone, as if speaking to a vendor. "Please stop by my office tomorrow to discuss appropriate compensation." Martina frowned. "Compensation?" As if saving a child were a service requiring payment. "It's not necessary, Mr. Grant. Anyone would have done the same." Thomas seemed genuinely surprised by her response. Lucy looked at Martina with a silent, pleading expression, as if she didn't want to be separated from her. "Come on, Lucy," Thomas ordered, taking his daughter's hand. "The nanny will be dismissed today. This is unacceptable." "But Daddy, it was my fault," Lucy tried to explain. "I wanted to see the downtown lights and—" "We'll talk at home," he interrupted her in a severe tone. Before leaving, Lucy broke free and ran back to Martina, hugging her tightly. "Thanks for the stories," she whispered. Thomas observed the scene with an indecipherable expression. For a split second, something seemed to soften in his gaze, but he quickly regained his composure. "Good night, miss." Martina Suarez." "Miss Suarez, I expect you in my office tomorrow at 9. It wasn't an invitation. It was an order. Martina nodded, more out of inertia than agreement. As she watched them walk away, she noticed how Lucy tried to take her father's hand, but he walked slightly ahead, as if the child were a mere appendage in his perfectly organized life. In that moment, Martina felt a strange mix of irritation and profound compassion. For the little girl, of course, but also, inexplicably, for the man who seemed so powerful, yet so utterly disconnected from what truly mattered. Part 2. An unexpected offer. At 8:55 a.m., Martina waited outside Thomas Grant's executive office, feeling that the suit she had chosen wasn't quite formal enough for the occasion. The receptionist eyed her with undisguised curiosity, trying to fathom what a lower-ranking employee was doing on the executive floor. "You may go in," the woman finally announced, barely concealing her surprise, as the door automatically slid open. Thomas Grant stood by the window, gazing at the sprawling cityscape of New York from high above. He didn't turn immediately when Martina entered. "Good morning, Mr. Grant," she said, trying to keep her voice professional. "Miss Suarez," he replied, finally turning. "Be brief. I have a video conference in 15 minutes. Martina stood still, genuinely confused why he had summoned her if he now seemed annoyed by her presence. "You asked me to come," she reminded him, maintaining her calm. Thomas nodded curtly and pulled an envelope from his desk. "This should cover any inconvenience you experienced yesterday," he said, extending the envelope towards her. "My assistant will justify your absence with your supervisor." Martina looked at the envelope without taking it. "I don't want your money, Mr. Grant." "Excuse me?" The man seemed genuinely baffled. "I helped your daughter because it was the right thing to do, not an expectation of a reward." For the first time, Thomas Grant appeared truly disconcerted. He placed the envelope on the desk and observed her more intently, as if she were an unsolvable riddle. "Everyone wants something," he stated with absolute certainty. "I just want to know how Lucy is," Martina responded sincerely. Something in Thomas's expression subtly shifted. "She's fine," he admitted, seemingly uncomfortable with this fact. "She asked about you this morning." A silence settled between them. Martina noticed that the man seemed to be calculating something mentally. "We have an opening," he finally stated. "Executive assistant to the director. The salary is 3 times what you currently earn." Martina blinked in surprise. Was he offering her a promotion? "I don't understand. Why are you offering me that position?" "Lucy responds well to you," he explained, as if it were a simple equation. "And I need someone reliable close by. People who do the right thing without expecting benefits are uncommon. Are you offering me a job because I saved your daughter? I am offering you an opportunity because you demonstrated integrity and judgment under pressure. 2 qualities I highly value in my close employees." Martina hesitated. The position meant a radical change in her career. But the cold, transactional way Thomas handled even this matter unsettled her. "And I would have to work directly with you? With me, and occasionally supervise Lucy when she's at the office," he clarified, glancing at his watch. "My daughter insisted on coming in today. Apparently, she's quite fascinated with you." Before Martina could respond, the door opened and Lucy entered, dressed in a spotless school uniform. Her eyes lit up when she saw Martina. "You came!" the girl exclaimed, running towards her. "Of course I came," Martina replied with a natural smile. "How are you today?" "Better. Daddy says you're going to work with him. Is that true?" Martina looked at Thomas, who was observing the interaction with an analytical expression. "I haven't decided yet," she answered honestly. "Say yes," Lucy pleaded. "Daddy never has time, and the new nanny doesn't tell stories like you do." Thomas cleared his throat, uncomfortable with his daughter's bluntness. "Lucy, Miss Suarez needs to consider her answer. It's a professional decision." "But Daddy—" "Go with Teresa. Your piano lesson is in half an hour," he interrupted her in a tone that allowed no argument. Lucy's shoulders slumped, and she headed for the door. But before leaving, she turned back to Martina. "Can I see you again, even if you don't work with Daddy?" The question, so simple and direct, struck Martina's heart. This child clearly needed more than just nannies and piano lessons. "I'd love to," Martina replied without thinking. When the door closed behind Lucy, Thomas let out a slight sigh. "My daughter doesn't usually connect with strangers," he commented, as if discussing a scientific phenomenon. "The position is yours if you want it, Miss Suarez, but I warn you, I am demanding and not very patient." Martina looked at him directly, carefully choosing her words. "I accept the job, Mr. Grant, but with one condition." He raised an eyebrow, clearly unaccustomed to having conditions placed on him. "Which is?" "That you understand I am not here to be your daughter's nanny or your personal assistant. If I'm going to do executive work, I expect to be treated as a professional." Thomas observed her for a few eternal seconds before sketching what could only be interpreted as a very faint smile. "You start Monday, Miss Suarez. Don't be late." Part 3. A new routine. 3 weeks had passed since Martina began working directly with Thomas Grant. The executive office was a completely different world from what she was used to. Silent, efficient, and cold, much like Thomas himself. "These proposals aren't ambitious enough," he stated, handing back a folder of documents. "We need to double growth this quarter." Martina took a deep breath, controlling her frustration. "Mr. Grant, these numbers are already optimistic. Anything more would be irresponsible." "Are you telling me how to run my company?" he asked sharply. "I am giving you my professional opinion, as you asked me to when you hired me," she replied, holding his gaze. The tension in the office was palpable, but before Thomas could respond, the door opened and Lucy entered. She now spent her afternoons in a small study room next to her father's office. "Martina!" the girl exclaimed, completely ignoring the tense atmosphere. "Can we go get ice cream? Daddy said yes." Thomas frowned. "I did not say that, Lucy. We are working." The girl's smile immediately vanished. Martina watched her small shoulders slump with disappointment. "But we can go when we finish," Martina interjected, looking at Thomas with a challenging expression. "Right, Mr. Grant?" He looked at her with surprise, clearly unaccustomed to anyone questioning his decisions, especially in front of Lucy. "I have a meeting in half an hour," he responded curtly. "Which I organized," Martina retorted, "and I just received an email saying it's been postponed until tomorrow." Thomas seemed momentarily disoriented. Lucy watched the scene with shining eyes, as if witnessing something extraordinary. "I suppose we can take a break," he finally conceded. Lucy's face lit up. Martina noticed it was the first time she had seen the girl genuinely excited. The ice cream parlor was just a few blocks from the office. Lucy walked between them, chattering non-stop about her school day. Martina subtly observed Thomas, who seemed uncomfortable outside the controlled environment of his company. "Do you ever come to places like this?" Martina asked, when Lucy ran ahead to see the flavors. "I don't have time for trivialities," he responded. "Spending time with your daughter is a triviality?" Thomas looked at her sharply. "I don't pay you to question my personal life, Miss Suarez. No, you pay me for my professional honesty," she replied. "But this isn't professional, it's human." Before he could respond, Lucy returned and took both their hands, pulling them towards the counter. Martina noticed how Thomas tensed at the contact, but he didn't pull his hand away. That afternoon marked a turning point. Without planning it, they began to create a routine. Twice a week, the three of them would leave the office, heading to the park for a snack or simply to walk around the city. Lucy blossomed with the attention, and Martina noticed small changes in Thomas, a fleeting smile when Lucy told a joke, a protective gesture when they crossed the street. A month later, during the annual company party, Martina was chatting animatedly with some colleagues when she felt an intense gaze upon her. Turning, she saw Thomas watching her from across the room. When their eyes met, he quickly looked away. "Looks like the boss doesn't like to share," one of her colleagues commented maliciously. Martina ignored the comment, but the feeling persisted throughout the night. Every time she laughed or spoke with someone, she could feel Thomas's eyes following her. "What do you think is going on with Thomas? Is it just professional concern or something more? Let me know in the comments." Part 4. Crossed lines. The next day, the atmosphere in the office was glacial. Thomas barely spoke to her, limiting himself to short, precise instructions. When Martina tried to ask him about plans to pick up Lucy, he cut her off. "That won't be necessary today. You can focus on your work." "Did something happen?" she asked directly. "Nothing that affects your work performance," he replied without looking at her. Martina felt a pang of irritation. It's difficult to maintain optimal performance when the work environment changes without explanation. Thomas finally looked up from his documents. "Last night, you seemed very comfortable socializing. I wouldn't want to interrupt your new friendships." "Are you jealous?" she asked before she could stop herself. The silence that followed was thick. Thomas looked at her with an impenetrable expression. "You are forgetting your place, Miss Suarez." "My place?" she retorted, feeling her blood boil. "And what exactly is that? Employee? Nanny? Friend of your daughter? Because it seems to change depending on your mood." "You are my assistant," he replied coldly, "and I suggest you remember professional boundaries." Martina took a deep breath, controlling her anger. "I understand boundaries perfectly, Mr. Grant. Perhaps you are the one confusing them." The tension was palpable. For a moment, it seemed like Thomas was going to say something more, but at that instant, the phone rang. It was Lucy's school. The girl had a fever and needed to be picked up immediately. "I'll go," Martina said automatically. "We'll both go," Thomas corrected, grabbing his jacket. "She's my daughter." In the car, the silence was oppressive. Martina stared out the window, thinking about how complicated everything had become. It wasn't just a job. It wasn't just a child who needed affection. It was something more, something she didn't dare to name. "I'm sorry," Thomas said suddenly, his voice low. "I shouldn't have spoken to you like that." Martina looked at him, surprised. It was the first time she had heard him apologize. "I'm sorry too," she replied sincerely. "This is complicated." He nodded slightly, his gaze fixed on the road. "More than I imagined," he admitted. Part 5. Drawing boundaries. Over the following days, Martina began to subtly distance herself. She arrived exactly on time and left as soon as her workday ended. She maintained strictly professional conversations with Thomas, and although she remained affectionate with Lucy, she avoided the outings that had become part of their routine. "I have a lot of work to catch up on," was her excuse when Lucy asked to go to the park. The girl looked at her with a mix of sadness and confusion that tugged at her heart, but Martina knew she needed to set boundaries. She couldn't keep building castles in the air. Thomas observed this change in silence. During meetings, he noticed how Martina avoided his gaze, how she tensed when he got too close. One afternoon, he found her organizing documents in the archive. "Are you avoiding me, Miss Suarez?" he asked directly. Martina started. She hadn't heard him come in. "I'm working, Mr. Grant," she replied without turning around. "As you asked me to." "Lucy asks about you. he said after a moment. She wants to know why we don't go for ice cream anymore. Martina took a deep breath before facing him. I think it's better to keep things professional, and that includes staying away from Lucy. That includes understanding that I am not part of your family. She responded with more harshness than she intended. I'm just an employee, remember? Thomas studied her with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see beyond her words. You know it's not just that. No. Martina put the documents on the table. Because you made sure to remind me very clearly. A tense silence settled between them. For the first time, Martina saw something akin to uncertainty in Thomas Grant's eyes. I don't know how to do this, he finally admitted, his voice low. Do what? This, he gestured vaguely between them. I don't know how to handle what's happening. Martina looked at him, surprised. She had never heard Thomas admit he didn't know something. What do you think is happening? She asked cautiously. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so human that it contrasted with his usual rigidity. Lucy loves you, he said, as if that explained everything. And me? The door burst open, interrupting him. It was his secretary. Mr. Grant, your video conference with Tokyo is about to begin. Thomas nodded mechanically. Before leaving, he looked at Martina with an indecipherable expression. This conversation isn't over, but days passed, and the conversation remained suspended. Martina continued to maintain her distance, although it pained her to see Lucy looking for her every time she came to the office. One afternoon, she found a drawing on her desk, 3 figures holding hands under a bright sun. My family, it read in childish letters. Martina carefully folded the drawing and put it in her bag, a lump in her throat. That night, her phone rang when she was already in bed. It was an unknown number. Hello? She answered sleepily. Miss Suarez. Thomas's voice sounded different, less controlled. I apologize for calling at this hour. Did something happen? She sat up immediately, worried. Is Lucy okay? She's fine, physically. He paused. But she won't stop asking for you. She had a nightmare, and she asked to talk to you. Martina closed her eyes, feeling a sharp pain in her chest. Mr. Grant, I don't think it's a good idea. Please. The word sounded strange coming from a man who never asked, only ordered. Just a few minutes. After a moment of hesitation, she agreed to speak to Lucy. The girl's small, trembling voice made her feel guilty for having distanced herself. Can you tell me a story? Lucy pleaded. Like the ones from the first day? Martina improvised a story about a star that was afraid to shine. When she finished, she heard the girl's even breathing. She fell asleep, Thomas said, taking the phone back. Thank you. There was a silence, but neither of them hung up. Miss Suarez. Martina. Thomas's voice sounded unusually hesitant. Could we talk? Not as boss and employee. Just talk. The proposal floated in the air, laden with implicit meanings. When? She finally asked. Tomorrow, after work. There's a coffee shop near the park where we take Lucy. Martina accepted, though something inside her warned her that she was crossing an invisible line. Part 6. A public declaration. The coffee shop was small and cozy, very different from the elegant places Thomas Grant frequented. He was already there when she arrived, sitting at a back table, not in his usual executive suit. In jeans and a casual shirt, he looked like a different man. Thank you for coming, he said when she sat opposite him. What did you want to talk about? She asked directly, avoiding formalities. Thomas rotated his coffee cup in his hands before responding. About why I find it so hard to connect with people, he finally said. About why Lucy feels closer to you than to me, even though I'm her father. The confession took her by surprise. She expected to talk about work, about professional boundaries, not about his insecurities as a parent. "You are a good father," she said sincerely. "You're just afraid to show what you feel." "I don't know how," he admitted, looking her in the eyes for the first time. "My father was the same. In our family, feelings were weakness. Feelings are what make us human," she replied softly. "And Lucy needs to know you love her, not just that you protect her." Thomas nodded slowly, as if processing her words. "Why did you distance yourself?" he asked suddenly. "The truth." Martina took a deep breath before responding. "Because I was getting too attached to Lucy and to you," she confessed, "and it scared me to realize that you two had become important to me." "And that's bad?" "It's complicated when one is the employee and the other is the millionaire boss," she replied with a sad smile. "We come from very different worlds, Thomas." It was the first time she had called him by his first name. He noticed it, and something in his gaze shifted. "We could try," he said in a voice that was no longer that of the implacable executive. "For Lucy." "Only for Lucy?" she asked, holding his gaze. Thomas's hand moved slowly across the table until it almost touched hers. "No," he admitted finally, "not just for her." The following Saturday, against all odds, Thomas invited Martina to accompany them to the zoo. It was the first time they had gone out outside of the office context on a completely personal day. "Look at the monkeys, Martina!" Lucy shouted, running from one exhibit to another with overflowing enthusiasm. "Daddy, carry me so I can see better." To Martina's surprise, Thomas lifted his daughter without hesitation, placing her on his shoulders. It was such a natural, paternal gesture that it contrasted enormously with the image of the cold businessman everyone knew. "I've never seen you like this," Martina commented as they walked towards the next exhibit. "Like what?" he asked, firmly holding Lucy's legs. "Relaxed, like a normal dad." Thomas managed an almost imperceptible smile, perhaps because I've never felt like a normal dad. That day marked the beginning of a new dynamic. Every weekend, the three of them did something together. Movies, the park, a museum, or simply walking around the city. Little by little, Thomas began to show a version of himself that no one in the company would have recognized. He laughed at Lucy's antics, played children's games, even read her bedtime stories when Martina visited them in his enormous house. One Sunday, while Lucy played with other children in the park, Thomas and Martina sat on a nearby bench. "They look like a family," said an old man passing by, smiling nostalgically. "How nice to see young couples enjoying their children." When the man walked away, an uncomfortable silence settled between them. "People assume things," Martina finally said, looking towards where Lucy was playing. "Does it bother you?" Thomas asked, studying her profile. Martina took her time to respond. "It doesn't bother me for me, but what exactly are we doing, Thomas? We're still boss and employee Monday through Friday, and on weekends we look like something else. What do you want us to be?" he asked, with a directness that left her speechless for a moment. "I want clarity," she finally responded. "I don't want to feel like I'm a social experiment for you and Lucy. I don't want you to one day decide I'm no longer needed and fire me from both jobs, the professional one and whatever this is." Thomas looked at her intensely before taking her hand. It was the first time he had deliberately touched her. "You are not an experiment," he said in a grave voice. "You are the only person, besides Lucy, who has made me question everything I believed was important." "I'm scared," she confessed. "I don't want to be rescued by you. I don't need you to save me from my normal life or turn me into someone I'm not." "I would never think that," he replied, surprised. "On the contrary, you are the one rescuing us." The sincerity in his voice made Martina truly look at him, beyond the facade of the powerful businessman. She saw a man struggling to connect, to learn to feel without fear. "Let's go slowly," she proposed, "without promising anything we can't deliver. Lucy deserves stability." He nodded, gently squeezing her hand. "And at the office?" "At the office, we remain professional," Martina completed. "I don't want anyone to think I'm where I am because of this." "No one who knows you would think that," Thomas affirmed. "You are the most capable person who has worked with me." Lucy ran back at that moment, her cheeks red from exercise and a huge smile. "Can we go for pizza? I'm hungry." Thomas looked at Martina as if asking for her approval. "Pizza sounds perfect," she responded, smiling. Over the next few weeks, they found a rhythm. At the office, they maintained impeccable professional distance. No one, except perhaps Thomas's secretary, who watched them with growing curiosity, could suspect that anything had changed between them. Outside of work, they allowed themselves to truly get to know each other. Martina discovered that Thomas had a dry, intelligent sense of humor that he rarely showed. He, for his part, marveled at the naturalness with which she navigated such different worlds. She could discuss financial strategies with executives and minutes later kneel to play with Lucy without losing her essence. One night, after tucking Lucy into bed, who had insisted Martina read her a story, they stayed on the terrace of the Grant Mansion, contemplating the lights of New York. "I've never asked you why you're so good with Lucy," Thomas said, pouring her a glass of wine. "You have a natural instinct with her." Martina took a sip before responding. "My younger sister has autism," she explained. "I learned from a young age that love has many ways of expressing itself. Sometimes words are unnecessary." "Like now," he murmured, slowly moving closer. The first kiss was tentative, almost shy. Nothing like the image of the powerful Thomas Grant, whom everyone feared at the office. When they separated, he looked at her as if he were seeing something precious and extremely fragile. "This changes things," Martina said, feeling a tingling in her stomach. "Everything changed the moment you rushed into traffic to save my daughter," he replied. "It just took me time to admit it." That night, when Thomas drove her home, they agreed to take things slowly. They didn't want Lucy to get her hopes up too soon, nor did they want to complicate the professional dynamic they had managed to balance. "See you tomorrow at the office, Mr. Grant," she joked as she said goodbye. "Punctual as always, Miss Suarez," he replied, with a smile he never showed at work. What they didn't know was that someone had photographed them in the park when Thomas took Martina's hand, and that this photo would very soon reach social media, unleashing a storm that would test everything they were building. Part 7. The storm breaks. The notification hit her phone at 6:15 a.m. It was a message from her friend, Caroline. "Is this true? Answer me now." Alongside the message was a link to a business gossip blog. Her heart pounding, Martina opened the link. The headline hit her like a bucket of cold water. "New York's most eligible bachelor caught by his assistant." The photo clearly showed Thomas holding her hand in the park, while Lucy played nearby. Below, venomous text insinuated that the ambitious assistant had achieved what many heiresses could not, trapping billionaire Thomas Grant, using his daughter as bait. Martina felt nauseous. The comments were even worse than the article. Typical social climber. She probably set him up. From assistant to Mrs. Grant. Well played. Her phone rang. It was Thomas. "Did you see it?" he asked without greeting, his voice tense. "Yes, it's horrible," she replied, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. "My lawyer is demanding they remove the publication, but it's all ready everywhere," he explained. "They sent the photo to several media outlets. What are we going to do?" There was a silence on the other end of the line. "I'll pick you up in 20 minutes. We'll talk in person." When Thomas's car pulled up in front of her apartment building, Martina was already waiting at the entrance. Unlike other times, the driver gave them privacy by raising the partition. Thomas looked like he hadn't slept. "I'm sorry," he said as soon as the car started. "I should never have exposed you like this." "It's not your fault," she replied, though a part of her felt exactly the opposite. "We didn't know they were taking photos. This is my life," he explained bitterly. "Anything I do ends up being scrutinized. I should have been more careful." Martina felt a chill, not because of the photos, but because of how Thomas talked about it, like a business problem that needed to be managed. "What do you mean by be more careful?" she asked directly. Thomas looked at her intensely. "I have a plan to handle this," he said in the tone he used in crisis meetings. "We can issue an official statement saying that you're a family friend who helps with Lucy. Explain that the photo is taken out of context. My PR team can—" "You want to deny us?" Martina interrupted him, incredulous. "I want to protect you," he responded. "You have no idea what the media is like when they smell blood. They'll investigate every detail of your life, your family, your friends, your past, everything. And what are they going to find, Thomas? That I come from a humble neighborhood? That my father is a mechanic and my mother cleans houses? Does that embarrass you? It's not about that." His voice sounded frustrated. "It's about them tearing you apart. They'll turn you into the gold digger who seduced the poor widower, using his daughter as bait." The word seduced hung between them like an accusation. Martina felt something break inside her. "Stop the car," she said, her voice firm. "What?" "Stop the car, now." The driver braked at Thomas's signal. They were a few blocks from the office. "Martina, please be reasonable." "Reasonable?" Her voice trembled with indignation. "You want me to hide, to deny what I feel? And I'm the irrational one?" "I'm thinking about what's best for everyone," he insisted. "For you, for me, for Lucy." She cut him off. "No, you're thinking about what's best for your image, aren't you? The great Thomas Grant can't be seen dating his assistant. What will his partners say? What will high society think?" Thomas's jaw clenched, visibly annoyed. "It's not that simple." "I never said it was," she replied, opening the door. "But if you're not willing to defend what we have in front of the world, then maybe we don't have anything worth fighting for." "Where are you going?" he asked, alarmed. "To the office. I'm going to pick up my things." "Are you resigning?" Martina looked at him one last time before closing the door. "I'm choosing to respect myself. Call me when you decide what's more important, what we have or what others think." Part 8. The public apology. The next few hours were a blur. She arrived at the office early, before most, but the few employees present looked at her with a mix of curiosity and thinly veiled malice. Some phones were quickly hidden when she passed by, as if they had just been reading the gossip about her. With trembling hands, she began to clear her desk. There wasn't much to pack: a few photos, a small cactus, office supplies. The most painful thing was taking the drawing Lucy had given her. "My family." She folded it carefully and put it in her bag. She was just finishing when the door opened. For a moment, her heart skipped a beat, thinking it would be Thomas, but it was the head secretary. "Mr. Grant just called," she said in a neutral tone. "He canceled all his meetings for today." Martina nodded without responding. She hadn't seen Thomas since she left him in the car, and he hadn't tried to contact her. It was better this way. A clean break. When she left the building, the flashes of several cameras surprised her. 2 or 3 journalists rushed forward, shouting questions. "Is it true that you and Mr. Grant have a relationship? Are you using the child to get closer to your boss? How do you respond to accusations of being a social climber?" Martina lowered her head and walked as fast as she could until she reached a taxi. The tears she had held back all day finally overflowed when she closed the door. "Where to, miss?" the taxi driver asked. For a moment, Martina hesitated. She didn't want to go back to her apartment, where journalists would surely be waiting. She didn't want to go to her parents' house and have to explain everything. "To the Sanctuary Cafe, please," she finally replied. It was the small coffee shop where she had worked before joining Thomas's company. A place where no one would judge her, where she could think about what to do with the broken pieces of her life. The Sanctuary Cafe hadn't changed at all. The aroma of freshly ground coffee, the worn wooden tables, the warm light streaming through the large windows. For Martina, it was like stepping back in time to a simpler life. "Martina!" exclaimed Mrs. Carmen, the owner, seeing her enter. "What a surprise. We haven't seen you here in a while." "Hello, Mrs. Carmen," she replied with a faint smile. "Can I stay for a bit?" Mrs. Carmen pointed to a secluded table in the corner and brought her a latte without Martina having to ask. "On the house," she said with a warm smile. "Whatever it is, you're home here." Martina silently thanked her for the gesture. She took out her phone and turned it off. She didn't want to see more messages, more photos, more speculation about her life. She needed to think. Do you think Thomas will find her? What should Martina do next? Leave your predictions in the comments. Almost an hour had passed when the bell above the door chimed. Martina instinctively looked up and froze. Lucy had just burst into the cafe, followed by Thomas, who looked like he had been searching for her all over the city. "Martina!" the girl cried, spotting her, and ran to her, hugging her tightly. "We found you!" Martina hugged Lucy automatically, but her eyes were fixed on Thomas, who approached more slowly. He was wearing the same suit from the morning, but he looked completely different. His hair was disheveled, his tie loosened, and an expression of raw determination she had never seen before etched his face. "How did you find me?" Martina asked when he reached her table. "I called your friend Caroline," he replied. "She told me you used to work here. Why are you looking for me? I already made my feelings clear." Thomas looked around. The cafe was almost full. Several customers were watching them with curiosity. Some were even discreetly pulling out their phones to photograph them. "Lucy, can you go ask the lady at the counter for a hot chocolate?" Thomas asked, handing his daughter a bill. When the girl walked away, Thomas sat opposite Martina. For the first time since she had known him, he seemed nervous. "You're right," he said without preamble. "I was a coward. I was more concerned with what others would say than with how you felt, than with how I felt." Martina looked at him, saying nothing, waiting for him to continue. "All my life, I've been in control of everything," he went on. "My company, my investments, Lucy's education. I thought I could control this too. What we have, but it's not like that." "You can't manage feelings like you manage your businesses, Thomas," she replied in a low voice. "And I'm not going to hide as if it were something shameful." "I don't want you to hide," he interrupted, taking her hand on the table. "On the contrary." At that moment, Martina noticed more phones pointing towards them. She tried to withdraw her hand, but Thomas held it firmly. "Let them," he said, looking at her intensely. "Let everyone see." "What are you doing?" she asked, confused by his change in attitude. Thomas took a deep breath before speaking. "I'm choosing what's important. You, us." Before Martina could respond, Thomas stood up from his seat and cleared his throat. The entire cafe fell silent. "Excuse the interruption," he said, his voice clear and firm. "I am Thomas Grant, and most of you have probably already seen the news about me and this woman." Murmurs spread through the place. Martina wanted the ground to swallow her. "Thomas, don't do this," she pleaded in a low voice. But he continued. "What those news reports don't tell you is that Martina Suarez is the bravest, most honest, and most selfless woman I have ever met. She doesn't care about my money or my position. In fact, she just resigned from her job because I acted like an idiot who couldn't appreciate her." The silence in the cafe was absolute. All eyes were on them. I want you to know, and for everyone who sees the videos you're surely recording to know, that this woman needs absolutely nothing from me. She was perfectly fine before she met me. Her life had meaning. She had friends. She had this place where everyone loves her. It is I who needs her, because she taught me that there are things far more important than power or money. Martina felt tears welling in her eyes. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Martina," Thomas said, turning to her, his gaze unwavering. "I'm not asking you to come back to work for me. I'm asking you to give me the opportunity to be better, to be the man you deserve, the man Lucy deserves as a father." As if she had heard her name, Lucy returned at that moment with her hot chocolate and stood watching the scene with wide-eyed curiosity. Seeing Martina crying, she put down her mug and hugged her tightly. "Don't cry, Mommy," she said naturally, as if that word had always been on her lips. Time seemed to stand still. Martina looked at the girl, surprised, and then at Thomas, who seemed as impacted as she was by what he had just heard. "Lucy, Martina began, unsure how to respond. "Don't you want to be my mommy?" the little girl asked with a shadow of sadness. It was the simplest yet most complex question she had ever been asked. Martina looked around, at the cafe where she had worked, at the customers watching expectantly, at Thomas who awaited her response with a vulnerability she had never seen from him. And then she knew. It didn't matter what the gossip blog said, or the company executives, or high society. The only thing that mattered was what she felt. "I would love to be your mommy, Lucy," she finally responded, hugging the girl as tears freely streamed down her cheeks. "But that's something the three of us need to talk about, calmly." Thomas approached and hugged both of them, not caring about the cameras, the murmurs, or the applause that began to erupt in the cafe. "I love you," he whispered in Martina's ear, "and this time, I'm not afraid for the whole world to know." Part 9. Building a real family. The video of Thomas's declaration at the Sanctuary Cafe went viral within hours. The very same blogs that had accused Martina of being a social climber now praised the modern love story between the executive and the brave, ordinary woman. The narrative had completely shifted, but Martina didn't care about the headlines. Sitting in the small living room of her apartment, she gazed intently at Thomas as they discussed their future. "I'm not moving into your mansion," she stated with determination. "It's too soon and too ostentatious for me." Thomas smiled, already accustomed to her directness. "What do you propose then?" "I want to continue my career," she explained. "Not at your company, obviously, but I have an interview next week at Alvarez & Associates." "The competition?" he asked, raising an eyebrow in surprise. "Exactly," Martina replied with a challenging smile. "I don't want anyone to think I'm with you for convenience." Thomas looked at her with genuine admiration. Any other woman would have jumped at the opportunity to settle into his luxurious life without a care. But Martina wasn't just any woman. "And Lucy?" he asked. "She adores you. She called you Mommy." The memory warmed Martina's heart. A week had passed since that moment at the cafe, and the girl continued to use that word with complete naturalness. "We can look for a place near her school," she suggested. "A normal apartment where we can be together on weekends." Step by step, Thomas, without rushing. "I never thought I'd find someone who would slow me down instead of asking for more," he confessed, taking her hand. "It's refreshing." "I'm not like the women you know," she responded. "Thank God for that." The following months were a constant adjustment. Martina found a job at the rival firm, where she quickly excelled due to her skills. Thomas had to learn to respect that she wasn't available at all hours. There were arguments, difficult moments, days when both wondered if they could bridge the differences between their worlds. But there were also joys, like when they found a cozy apartment 2 blocks from Lucy's school. It wasn't luxurious, but it had 3 bedrooms and a small balcony where they ate breakfast together on Sundays. "Don't you miss your pool and your garden?" Martina asked Lucy, helping her with her math homework. "I like it better here," the girl replied sincerely. "Daddy smiles all the time." It was true. The Thomas Grant, whom his employees knew as a demanding and cold boss, was completely different in the small apartment. He cooked with Lucy. He watched movies, holding Martina close. He had even learned to do the dishes without complaining. One afternoon, while Lucy played in her room, Thomas sat next to Martina on the sofa. "I have something for you," he said, handing her an envelope. "If it's another credit card, I already told you I don't want it," she replied, half joking, half serious. They had had that discussion before. "Open it," he insisted. Inside was a legal document. Martina read it quickly and looked up, surprised. "A trust for Lucy? With my name as co-guardian? I want you to know that I trust you completely," Thomas explained. "This isn't just a relationship, it's a family we're building." Martina felt a lump in her throat. "I don't need papers to love Lucy," she said, her voice cracking. "I love her as if she were my own." "I know," he responded. "But if something happened to me, I want to make sure you two are together. Legally." It was the most significant gesture he could make. More than expensive jewelry or promises of eternal love, this document represented absolute trust. "Thank you," she simply said, kissing him. Months passed. Routines were established. Martina excelled in her new job. Thomas learned to delegate more, to make time for his family. Lucy blossomed with the constant love of both of them. It wasn't a perfect life. There were still disapproving glances in certain high society circles. Some executives made veiled comments about Thomas Grant's peculiar choices. The parents of other children at the private school sometimes treated Martina with condescension, but none of that mattered within the walls of their shared home. There, they were simply a family, with their routines, their small quarrels, and their moments of everyday happiness. Part 10. The True Meaning of Wealth. One Sunday morning, almost a year after that chaotic encounter in traffic, Thomas prepared coffee while Martina organized lunches for the week. Lucy, sitting at the kitchen table, read aloud a poem she had written for school. "My family isn't like the others, but it's perfect for me," the girl recited proudly. "I have a daddy who learned to smile, and a mommy who found me along the way." Martina stopped what she was doing and hugged Lucy, moved by the simplicity and depth of her words. "Did you like it?" the girl asked. "It's the most beautiful poem I've ever heard," Martina responded sincerely. "The teacher said I could invite my parents to read it in front of the class," Lucy explained enthusiastically. "Will you both come?" Thomas and Martina exchanged a knowing glance. They had long stopped worrying about what others thought. "We wouldn't miss it for anything in the world," Thomas assured, ruffling his daughter's hair. "But don't mess up my hair," Lucy protested, making the adults laugh. These small arguments, these trivial moments, were what they valued most now. Normalcy built from chaos. A family formed by choice, not by obligation. Later, as Lucy got ready for school, Thomas kissed Martina before leaving for an early meeting. "You changed everything," he whispered against her lips. She smiled, caressing his cheek. "You too," she replied. "But I'm not going to stop working, okay?" Thomas let out a genuine laugh, the kind he had never had before meeting her. "I wouldn't expect anything less from you." And so, in the simplicity of an ordinary morning in the kitchen of a normal apartment, between coffee cups and school bags, they had found something extraordinary. A love without idealizations, a family without imposed roles, a happy ending built day by day, with effort and will. It wasn't the perfect love story sold in movies. It was better. It was real. The morning light streamed through the apartment curtains, creating golden patterns on the breakfast table. 6 months had passed since Lucy's poem presentation, and life had found its own rhythm. Thomas, dressed in jeans and a casual shirt, something unthinkable a year ago, made coffee while humming a song. He was no longer the implacable businessman everyone feared. He was still brilliant in business, but he had learned to delegate, to trust, to live. "Lucy, breakfast is ready," he called, pouring orange juice into 3 glasses. Martina entered the kitchen with damp hair and a sleepy smile. She had adapted so well to her new position at Alvarez & Associates that she had already been offered a promotion. The friendly competition between her and Thomas had become a recurring joke between them. "Good morning," she murmured, stealing a quick kiss. "Is the princess awake yet?" "She's finishing her hair," he replied, handing her a coffee cup. "Says they have a museum trip today." Martina nodded, nibbling on toast as she checked her agenda on her phone. "I have an important meeting at 2, she commented. "Can you pick her up? Is that possible?" Thomas responded, frowning. "I have the presentation for the Japanese investors." They looked at each other, facing one of those small, daily conflicts that were part of their shared life. "I can order an Uber," Lucy suggested, appearing at the door in her impeccable uniform and a perfectly braided ponytail. "I'm 10 years old now. I'm not a baby." Thomas and Martina exchanged worried glances. Lucy's growing independence was another challenge they faced as parents. "Not even in your dreams," they responded in unison, making the girl laugh. "I'll call my mom," Martina finally offered. "She's thrilled to be a pseudo-grandmother. She can pick her up and take her home until one of us gets there." Lucy smiled, satisfied with the solution. She sat at the table and began to spread jam on a piece of toast with absolute concentration. "Daddy, did you know monarch butterflies travel more than 4,000 kilometers every year?" she asked suddenly. "It's the topic of my science project." "Really?" Thomas responded, genuinely interested. "We could research it more this weekend." "But this weekend we're visiting Grandma and Grandpa," Martina reminded him. Thomas winced. His relationship with Martina's parents had improved considerably, but he still felt out of place in the modest home where she grew up. "Your dad still looks at me like I'm going to steal you," he muttered. "My dad looks at everyone like that," Martina laughed. "Besides, he likes you. He let you use his workshop last time, after asking me 3 times if I knew the difference between a wrench and a screwdriver," he protested. Lucy watched them with a smile. She loved listening to them argue like this, without real tension, just the natural back and forth of 2 people who had learned to share their lives. "Did you finish your math homework?" Martina asked, changing the subject. "Almost," Lucy replied, putting her gaze. "Almost means you haven't even started it," Thomas questioned, knowing his daughter well. Lucy sighed dramatically. "Fractions are boring. Fractions are important," Martina insisted. "We'll review them together tonight. Deal?" The girl nodded, though without much enthusiasm. Then, as if remembering something important, she pulled a folded paper from her backpack. "I almost forgot. The teacher sent this for you too." It was an invitation to the end-of-year play. Lucy would have a starring role. "But it's during work hours," Thomas murmured, checking the date. "We can make it work," Martina assured, placing a hand on his. "We'll cancel whatever is necessary." Lucy's eyes sparkled with happiness. Not so long ago, her father would never have considered adjusting his schedule for a school event. "We're going to be late," Martina exclaimed, looking at the clock. "Finish your breakfast, Lucy. Thomas, can you clear the table today?" "Why is it always me?" "Because I made dinner last night," she replied, winking. Thomas smiled, accepting defeat. As Lucy hastily finished her juice, Martina gathered her things and looked for the car keys. Morning chaos was part of their normalcy now. There were no longer assistants coordinating their schedules, no chauffeurs waiting, no mansions with service staff. Just the three of them navigating life together, with their complications and their joys. Before leaving, Thomas hugged Martina around the waist and kissed her deeply, ignoring Lucy's protests about how gross adult kisses were. "I love you," he whispered against her ear. "You changed everything." Martina smiled, remembering how far they had come since that first chaotic encounter in the traffic of New York. "You changed everything too," she replied softly. "But I'm not going to stop working, okay?" Thomas let out a genuine laugh, the kind of laugh he had never had before meeting her. "I wouldn't expect anything less from you." And so, as the three of them left the apartment, amidst laughter and small arguments about who had forgotten to turn off the lights, any casual observer would have simply seen a normal family starting their day. And that was exactly what they were, a family built with effort, with respect, with conscious choices every single day. Not perfect, but perfectly theirs. The happy ending hadn't been granted as a gift. They had built it together, brick by brick, day by day, decision by decision, and that made it infinitely more valuable. Well, friends, what do you think? If this story of Martina and Thomas touched your heart as much as it did mine, don't forget to leave your like and share this video with those special people who also believe in true love, the kind that is built day by day with effort and honesty. A love that doesn't depend on material things, but on the choices we make every day for those we love. I'd love to know where in the world you're watching us today. What country are you enjoying this unconventional love story from? Tell us in the comments if you identify with Martina, with Thomas, or with little Lucy. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind us that happy endings exist, but you have to build them with courage and authenticity.